the actual presentation. Fugu in the wild. My name is Thomas Steiner. I work for Google in the Chrome Developer Relations team. You can find me as Tomayak on the internet in general. And yeah, today I want to talk about Fugu in the wild. If you go to the project landing page at web.dev/fugu-status, you can see our mission here. Web apps should be able to do anything iOS/Android/desktop apps can. Google wants to make sure, wants to make it possible for you to build and deliver apps on the open web that have never been possible before. So let's reread this again. Web apps should be able to do anything iOS, Android, desktop apps can. This is a pretty bold mission statement. And not everybody likes this idea. Actually, some folks are really angry. So angry that in Android 11, they took away our official emoji and removed it and made it look really, really ugly. Coincidence? I think not. This was a joke, obviously. So there is no war between Android and Fugu, but since now I have your attention, let's look at Fugu in the wild. I have a couple of stories that I want to tell, and I have a couple of stats that I want to show. So recently I landed the capabilities of Project Fugu report on the HTTP archive. You can see the URL down there, http://archive.org/reports/Project Fugu. And we have data for a couple of the APIs that we develop in the context of the project. So there's, for example, the badging API, and we have stats for badge set. So when someone sets a badge, and you can see here the curve is going up, which is good. It's going down a little on mobile recently, but in general, it's still going up. But we are at 0.0%. If you look at the small print, you can see it's like 0.0005% of all pages. We have sets for get installed related applications. You can see both curves go up here. And this being mostly an API that is focused on mobile, you can see the mobile curve actually goes up a lot more. Again, we're at very low numbers in absolute figures. The periodic background sync API has a method for registering a periodic sync event. And you can see here, oh, this one actually goes down a little. We're at 0.00003% at maximum. So that's good. And we have stats for screen wake lock. I just picked a couple of random examples here so you can see there's a pattern. We have in absolute numbers relatively low or very low adoption. But when you look at the curve, you can see that relative growth is pretty good. But yeah, these numbers look low, they are low. But the thing is, we have a blind spot here. HTTP archive only tracks things that happen on load. So anything that happens after load or that requires a user gesture, we don't see in HTTP archive. So this is something to be aware of when you look at these numbers. Another data source that we can use is Chrome status. If you go to chromestatus.com/metrics/feature/timeline, you have this massive select box at the top. And if you know what to look for example, here, wake lock, acquire screen lock, you can get data where we also have actual usage data. So whenever someone acquires a wake lock, a screen wake lock, this will get tracked. And we have the data here in our telemetry that we make available for folks to look at. So you can see here, it looks a little better. We have 0.01, 0.02, 0.03. If you scroll down a little bit on that page, you can actually see sample URLs that use this API. And the first one here, I tested this morning, clocktab.com. It's actually a timer of sorts. The second one is as well, timer tab, where they make a timer available. And for a timer, it obviously makes sense that it stays on the screen visible so that people can actually do something with the timer. And there are a couple more examples that you can go through and look at what they do with this API. So this is a lot more useful in the sense of getting actual usage data. So These numbers look better. And yeah, as I just said, we cover actual usage, but they're still lowish. If you compare to other APIs, like any kind of random JavaScript API, compared to those numbers, still the Project Fugu APIs in general tend to have relatively low adoption. So the question is, what can we do about it? How can we make this better? How can we make BlinkOn 14, if I gave the same presentation, how can we have better numbers there? So we have a couple of ways how we deal with that. The Chrome Web DevRel team has a sub-team that is focused on Fugu, and we do have public outreach. You may have seen our landing page, web.dev/tags/capabilities, where we have a number of articles where we present all the APIs that we have developed in the context of the project. We have a couple of case studies. So you can see here, the second one, for example, is for a PWA that uses background offline video playing and so on. So there's a couple more, and there's a lot of API descriptions in the various articles. So on the right-hand side, you can see from François, control, camera, pan, tilt, and zoom, and so on. So there's a lot of APIs that are covered there. So there's definitely a lot of developers that we can reach this way. The second way we can reach people is by doing one-on-one outreach. Here's an example where I opened an issue on the GitHub of Photo Pair, which is something like a Photoshop kind of application on the open web. And essentially in this GitHub issue, I asked the developer, hey, what about supporting the, back then it was called Native File System API, now it's been renamed to File System Access API. So I just opened the question here. How about supporting this? Here's a couple of examples of apps that have done this. Here's how they've done it, la la la. It started innocently with just one comment that I posted. It turned out to become a really long thread. So you can see here on the right-hand side, this is the full page screenshot of the GitHub issue. So there was a lot of discussion how this should be done and what kind of features would be available and what other things would potentially break if they accepted this and so on. So it's been a tough fight, but I'm happy to report that after this tough fight, Photopair now actually does have File System Access API support. And you can just open and save files through the regular file system API. So that's a success. That's pretty cool. And this is one-on-one outreach with a happy end where the developer in the end, after all the discussions, decided to adopt the API. Another example is from Hexedit or Hexedit. I'm not sure how to pronounce it actually. It's a hex editor that happens to be developed by a German developer. So I contacted them simply via email, asking them, so the person is called Jens. Hey Jens, internally in our team chat, someone shared your PWA, your hex editor. It's a really cool app. Have you considered accepting the native file system as a feature request so that working with files becomes easier, so that you can export files and so on, la la la. I pointed to a library that we have developed and just ended with, if you could implement this, this would be great. I'm here for questions. And happy ending as well. Jens, after some back and forth, actually decided to implement the API. And he implemented it. He came back with a couple of questions. And this being a hex editor, people tend to edit interesting files here. So it turns out this is a hex editor that is being used massively by people who hack games. So in this case, the API actually supported some use cases that were completely impossible before to do on the web. We also had some interesting bugs because being used as a hex editor, people changed executable files of games, which caused our virus scanners or the Chrome save download feature to trigger. So that's kind of interesting side effects here that probably no one in the early stages of the project would have expected. So that's another happy ending where we got someone to implement this. One-on-one support. So in some cases, people use our APIs. So in this case, there was a project. Let me just go one slide forward. Yeah, microblocks is the name. Where, oops, sorry, where microblocks, which is a coding environment, used the web serial API, but in their documentation, they made people flip a browser flag, which is something that a lot of people are afraid of or just don't know how to do. The good news is there's an origin trial for the web serial API. And in this case, it was just a matter of pointing them at the fact that they just need to activate the origin trial for their app. And like that, they can use it. So with that, the step of flipping the browser flag obviously went away. So a lot more people from there on could just use the web application easily. And you can see a screenshot here, just program with microblocks without any additional steps. So that's another small success story where just pointing someone at the fact that you can just activate an origin trial made a real difference. Another way to scale this would be to create libraries. For the file system access API, I've done that. I've created a library called Browser Native FS that just makes adopting the API a lot easier simply because it falls back to the legacy approaches of using the input type file and the A download fallbacks, so that as a developer, you just code against this API, and then in the back end, it gets decided if the native API gets used or if the fallback methods get used. So like that, developers don't have to worry about it, and they can just use it. How do you bootstrap such a library? So how do you get the word out? What I did was I just looked at popular applications, and I found Excalidraw, where this would be a great addition. So I just opened a pull request asking them, hey, would you be happy to accept this? And Excalidraw is a very open community. So if you ever want to try open source and have a positive experience, definitely try out Excalidraw. It's one of my best open source experiences, really a super welcoming environment. And yeah, people there. So anyway, long story short, they accepted the library. We found a couple of implementation improvements over the months and yeah, over time. And yeah, now I'm happy to report that if your browser supports the file system access API, you can now use Excalidraw with the file system access API. And if you don't, if you use it on a different browser, it will just silently fall back, and you can use the application nevertheless. It won't be as great as it could be, but still you can use it. So that's another success story. And by just implementing this library and testing it out with real applications, we found and improved it over the time, as I said before. So hopefully more people can use this. We documented this in web.dev as well. There's an article that I wrote about the integration. So if you ever are in a situation like that, definitely give Browser Native FS a try. So bootstrapping a library is hardish. So sometimes you can also improve existing libraries. And one of them is NoSleep.js. NoSleep.js is a library that's used to sort of implement a wake lock. So the way this works is when you have a page, you can play an invisible video, or the library plays an invisible video, which causes the browser to acquire a media wake lock. Of course, the video is never visible, so that's kind of a really ugly hack. The thing is, this library is really popular. So you can see here, it's used by 1,961 at the time where I took the screenshot, other projects. So if you could just leverage this library somehow, you would get immediate scaling effects. And that's essentially what I did. I opened a PR asking them to merge a feature where I added native file system, native wake lock support. So essentially, the browser just checks, does the browser support the wake lock API? If yes, then use it, else fall back to the legacy hack with the invisible video. And this got merged as well. And now, since version 11 of this API or of this library, everyone using NoSleep.js will just, without really realizing, just automatically use the Wakelock API. So that's a nice success. And the big question now is, how can we repeat and scale this? So here's my proposal. I wrote to the Blink API owners mailing list, asking them, can we somehow formalize the signals that we ask from web and framework developers in an intent to ship? So essentially, my idea is, if during feature development we can find evidence that there is already someone who does something in the vein of the new API that you want to add, like as I said before, Wakelock was sort of done by the ugly hack of having the invisible video. Or another example is the idle detection API, where Dropbox has a library where they do sort of idle detection. This is a clear signal that we can say then there's evidence that people want this feature, people have gone the extra mile, people have developed a library, people have developed maybe an ugly hack that does what we want. So my idea is, can we somehow formalize this and make it part of the intent to ship, so that if we have some development like that, where we can prove there's demand for a feature, that we can then add it as an official signal to the intent to ship. There's of course more ways this kind of signals can be captured. One of them is Twitter polls. So someone sets up a Twitter poll and asks like, do you want this API, or would this be a good idea? Or if you had a way to do this, would you use it? Whatever way you formulate this. You could also have, of course, a GitHub thread comments where someone raises an issue and says, hey, it would be great if we had ABC, la la la. So the idea is really to formalize this, to make this part of the intent to ship process. I sent out an email, as I said, to the Blink API owners mailing list, asking for this, suggesting where this could land. So you can see here, this is a screenshot from Chrome status. And there's web framework developer views and signals. And if you look at most of them nowadays, people just leave the signal as no signals, which is, of course, a really bad signal, because if there's no proven evidence that people want a feature, it's pretty easy to turn it down. So if we formalize this, if we just make a way or find a way to really get thinking about how can we formalize proving that there is demand, this will then eventually, hopefully, help us scale our efforts in landing PRs like Wakelock in NoSleep.js, or I don't know, other kind of features where we just have an interesting idea, where we have someone who does it already, so we can then patch this thing, improve upon it, and just have an easier time not having to bootstrap a library and not having to maintain a library, which is of course also a burden. Whenever you have something that gets popular, of course people will use it and people will hope you maintain it. And the more libraries we develop ourselves, the more this becomes an actual burden. So if we find a way to scale it out to existing libraries, this would be, of course, a lot easier. So this is the idea. Maybe you have other ideas, maybe you have other, I don't know, scaling problems at hand or scaling solutions at hand. So with that, thank you very much for listening. And we can hopefully now take the remaining, 7 minutes for some discussion, how you would help Fugu APIs scale, and how you would see more Fugu APIs in the wild in the next couple of months and weeks that are ahead of us. Thank you very much. Let's move back, or let me move back actually to the video that I can see everyone. Let me stop sharing. Here we go. So question to the room. Is there anyone who has a good idea how we can scale this, or does anyone have feedback on the proposal to formalize the developer feedback? How can we get more no signals? And just speak up, so no need to raise hands. I think this should be a small enough room for this to work.
I'm not sure I understood the very last part of that. How do we get more no signals?
I think I messed up the double negation. So how do we get less no signals? That's what I wanted to say. Sorry.
Cool. Okay, that does make sense then. I was just getting an impedance mismatch.
Yeah, sorry.
One quick idea is that like you've got some valuable lessons that you've already learned. Will it not be twice as easy to do it the next time? Like, is there an opportunity to scale just through efficiency?
So one-on-one will always remain one-on-one. Of course, the bigger the partner, the more kind of networking effects you get. So I don't know, people see Excalidraw, like you end up seeing Excalidraw diagrams all over the place now. So people see this and maybe people experience that it has a great way of dealing with files. So people might wonder how is it done? So we get some scaling effects from this. We get some scaling effects from just having case studies like on web.dev, where we describe a feature, how it's being used by a big popular application. So there's definitely this. But yeah, it remains a one-on-one effort. So we're perfectly there and perfectly happy to do it. We just can only reach that many partners or developers by one-on-one. When it comes to scaling libraries, I think whatever we can do ourselves, we will do it. But then we will always ask the question, like, how many should we do? Because my management chain rightly asked the question, like, how many maintenance libraries do you want to have in the future? And the more you have, the worse, of course, the less time you can focus on your core job. So that's a good question. So I think what is important for us as Chrome DevRel would be if Chrome engineers who build features, who are aware potentially of other ways of doing it, if they tell us, look, there's this library, maybe we can leverage this library that already has the growth, has the adoption that we need to then land a PR, which is something that is relatively easy to do in most of the cases, because yeah, it just helps us grow our features by just making an existing library better, and ideally also so without all of the users ever noticing. So they would just update the library and then in the background just magically use our native API features. So I think there's definitely some lessons that we can learn and that we have learned. So yeah, I think what we need to learn more is getting more awareness for this kind of scaling potential that we have. I'm not sure if this answered the question, but yeah.
I would definitely like to see better tools for collecting developer feedback from a broader set of small partners. So like a challenge that I've had on a number of the hardware APIs that we've worked on is that it, like for example, Serial, there isn't one big, motivating partner for this. It's a collection of, a dozen or more, smaller companies building various tools, a lot in education. And it would be great to have a way of sort of collecting that feedback in a way that kind of made it look big, for lack of a better way of putting it.
One thing that we are thinking about is sort of building out, whether it's Chrome status or whatever we call it, as a mechanism for getting more signal like this. I don't know if Thomas, you or others have discussed any of that with the folks working on that, or which on one, but not in every conversation. So that's probably a good conversation to have, to dig in a bit more on that.
Rijo has his hand up.
Sorry, I missed that.
Rijo Batra has his hand up. Rijo?
You're muted.
Can't hear you.
Thomas, can you hear me now? Yeah, sorry. So quick question is, when some customer comes to the team, we do the feature and all, do you actively go to another customer who might be a competitor just to make this feature popular? For example, suppose image capture pan till zoom. I'm not naming anybody. customer A comes, there are customer B and C and D. Would you actively, as part of DevRel, go to B, C, and D and say, "Hey, this is a new feature. Do you want to have a look," or something like that?
So let me take this question, but also point to Thomas Nadestad, who deals with partners. So from a DevRel point of view, we definitely would do this sort of in a grassroots way. So internally, we have a team that deals with partners, and I'll let Thomas speak for this. Thomas, do you want to take this question?
You can go ahead, and then I can add anything at the end.
All right. So yeah, we have a partnerships team that would reach out to partners. We have a scaled, like extended partnerships team that reaches an even bigger set of partners. So we would definitely go out. The thing is, partners have repeatedly let us know that they have limited capacities, as always. So people have to be very strategic when it comes to yet another, hey, do you want to try this API? It might go away because it's an origin trial, la la la. So we want to be very careful when it comes to like broad outreach, because in the end, we might burn a partner by just proposing too many features. But we definitely do always reach out to the strategic partners when it's something that is in their core interest. And it's always a call of the partner managers, like how many times have I contacted company X in the last couple of whatever months. Sometimes they would bundle requests as well. So they would say, look, it's a, I don't know, feature that's coming out in Chrome 89, but maybe we wait for the next partner meeting that's scheduled for when Chrome 90 is launching. So these kind of things always can happen. But yes, we long story short, we would go out and tell partners about features.
Yep, I think you got the answer exactly right. I think the only thing I would add is that we do have a couple of partnerships which are extremely close, where we meet on a regular cadence. Most of our features that we decide to prioritize come from those kinds of forums where we work directly with partners. But sometimes, Teresa, to your question, we will just have something that we're building for another partner, and we'll use partner 3, that we have an ongoing relationship with, to check in with them and understand kind of what their requirements in the space are, and that could be really beneficial. It's also a good motivation for tackling various different verticals at the same time, rather than just going completely broad.
I just wanted to go back to Johnny's point from before, so Johnny Steinbeck. So definitely, if you want to contribute to this conversation, please do. The API owners have been relatively silent. I know it's busy times, but yeah, like any kind of discussion we can have around this, I think it's very worthwhile. So from my end, not being a Chrome engineer, I see it as something, yeah, how would a Chrome engineer perceive this? Are they aware of, I don't know, other libraries? Is this even a thing? Do they very much live in the Chrome browser world and don't really get to touch a lot of JavaScript code, which is something that I had to learn when I worked first with Chrome engineers, that this actually is a thing. But then, of course, there's a lot of people who also are active web developers as browser engineers. Yoav Weiss raised an interesting point on would this overwhelm Chrome DevRel? So if engineering would just take this as a service off and say, look, you want to have these signals, so Chrome DevRel, go out and do your due diligence and just reach out everyone. That's also something that can happen. So I think there's definitely, as you have pointed out, there's pros and cons to having this. A couple of people want to join. Okay, so there's pros and cons to people want to have this. In an ideal world, it can really help us build more APIs that more people demand, because we know that they want to build those. Something that's also important is, as Thomas said, we have a couple of strategic partners that might be operating in a niche, doing something that only they do. So if you build a feature for exclusively one partner, which sometimes might happen, or very few partners, let's put it that way, it's something where Joe and Jane, random web developer, would be like, what the heck is this even? Why are Fugu building this? But we know internally we're building this for this and that, but a strategic partner So I think it's also not universally applicable when we say there are no real developer signals, but there might be partner signals. And the problem with partner signals is sometimes we are under an NDA, so we can't really disclose what the partner is, who the partner is and what the partner wants. So I think, yeah, we just need to learn and discuss the pros and cons and understand better how can we, in the end goal, scale these APIs so that more people use them. And if there is an API that will be by definition used by very few partners, fine, that's just that. But then there's APIs that are hugely popular. Like we have seen massive uptake of file system access API. I haven't shown stats for that, by the way, because as I said before, on HTTP archive, we have this blind spot. But if you look on Chrome status, you can see it's a massively popular API, and like everyone who ever sees it and works in any kind of application workspace, they see the reason for having this. So yeah, I think let's have a discussion. Thanks for everyone who has an opinion and shares it.
See you all in the Slack for further discussion. Cheers.
All right, yeah, so I think we're officially out of time. Thanks for being here. I'll hang out in the Slack a couple more minutes. It's pretty late here, and I have to take the kids to bed soon, so I won't be there for very, very long. But yeah, the discussion definitely doesn't end here, so we can have mailing lists and whatever GitHub issues discussions. So yeah, thanks for listening, and yeah, see you soon at the next BlinkOn 14, hopefully in person again. Bye.